Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm sharing 3 perfect pearl techniques to try. These are ones that I always fall back on, and they're a great way to add a little bit of shimmer to your cards. So I'm starting out with a glimmer plate as well as a die. Both of them are Anemones and both of them are from Spellbinders. And I'm using some distress watercolor with the Glimmer Blooms plate. And then I'm using some black mixed media heavystock for the Anemones die. I'm cutting out the shadow of both of them, and then I'm taping the die to that piece of cardstock with some yellow tape, and I'm embossing the details into that cardstock. Now, what I want to do is once it's embossed, I want to watercolor with the perfect pearls on both the black and both the white. Now, one of them I do end up abandoning partway through the project because I didn't like the way it was turning out. But at this point, I wanted to see which one I liked better, which one worked better. And this is inspired by a picture I saw on Facebook. I saw someone use some black cardstock and they did some metallic watercolors on top of it. And I wanted to try that with some embossed die cuts. So I'm using the embossing die stacking on my Spellbinders Platinum 6, and it is pressing all of the details into those die cuts. Now on that white one, you could see the detail a lot more when you looked at the back of it than you could on the black one. The detail was there, you just couldn't see it as well in the camera. So before putting my machine away, I'm taking the die off of the black shadow and I'm cutting some masking magic. What I want to do here is I want to cut it with this die and put it on that black die cut to use as a mask while I'm doing the watercoloring. And this ended up being a great way to get a lot of really nice fine detail in the watercoloring that I'm doing. So all of the little tiny pieces that are falling out of that die cut there, I'm not using any of them. I'm only using the outline part. Masking magic, if you've never used it before, it's got kind of a post-it note stick to it, but it's a great way of masking off areas. I've used it many times with doing ink blending and it works wonderfully for that. I've never used it for this technique with watercolor, and I was really curious to see how well I would get some nice crisp detail, and it works perfectly. So once I have everything lined up, I'm just using my finger to rub that masking magic die cut down. I want to make sure it's got some really good contact with that mixed media heavy stock. I'm using 4 different perfect pearls colors for this project. For the flowers, I'm using Grape Fizz and Pink Gumball. And then I'm using Pewter for the center of the flowers, and I'm using green patina for the leaves. I'm using a water brush, and I'm just using the dampness from my water brush in my Perfect Pearls tin just to pull some of that out, and then I'm mixing it up with the water on my glass mat here. This is a perfect surface for doing this. If you don't have a glass mat, you could also take a plate, you could take a recycled sour cream lid or something like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be glass. It could even be a piece of packaging that you're reusing as a little bit of a palette. Just something that's non-porous that you can easily mix your perfect pearls with the water. Now, the cool thing about mixing your own perfect pearls with the water is you can control your concentration. So if you have a lot of water and a little bit of perfect pearls, it's going to be a lot more transparent. If you add a lot of perfect pearls and a little bit of water, it's going to be a lot thicker and a lot more opaque. So it's great that you can control exactly how thick and how opaque and how transparent you want it to be. This painting with it works just like painting with anything else. I'm using one of the colors from the top of the flowers, and then I'm wiping my brush on a piece of paper towel to clean it off, and then I'm going into the other color and going from the bottom or the base of the petal and going up. I love doing it like this because then you get 2 different colors in a petal, and it just gives it a little bit more of an interesting look. You don't necessarily have to do it this way. You could do 1 color per petal, but I just love the look of the 2 different colors blending together. And while the colors are wet, they're very easy to blend together. When you have less water and more perfect pearls, It also dries fairly quickly, so you don't have to wait a long time for it to dry. When I did this on the white distress watercolor die cut, I found that I had a harder time with the detail because I didn't have the masking magic to hold all that detail in there. And it was a little bit harder sometimes while painting to see the detail in there to get precise painting. I was doing it fairly quickly, but I think even if I was doing it very slowly, you'd have to do it really, really slow and be very precise with your brush strokes in order to get a really nice, neat look. As I was working, I was noticing how it kind of looked a little bit sloppy, even though I was going with the embossed detail in that die cut. Because I didn't have the masking magic and because I didn't have the contrast between the mica and on the black and the white, you were losing a lot of that detail anyways. So even if I had finished it and even if I had been very, very slow, it really wouldn't have had the same impact that it does on the black. But sometimes you just don't know these things until you try them out. So I am glad that I tried it, and it is nice to know which one has a better result and which one I wouldn't really try again, or maybe if I did try it, I would tweak something. So shortly after putting the centers on these flowers, I tucked it to the side and then I totally abandoned it because especially after I took this masking magic off and I saw the contrast between the mica on the flowers and the black background, I liked it so much better. It had a much bigger wow factor. I decided I wasn't even going to finish the white one because it just wasn't having the same impact. So the leaves themselves, a little bit harder because this particular die cut out the leaves. So I've got that embossed in there, but there was no way to have those outlines because that's not what the die cut did. I'm still going to have some pretty leaves here, but I'm just going with the embossed indentation that die left in here. So it does look nice in the end. It's just not quite as precise as the flowers, which is totally fine. So I'm using the green patina. The process is exactly the same as the petals, except for the fact that I'm only using one color here. I'm not blending two colors together, and it's fairly easy to see exactly where the leaves are. Anytime I was second guessing myself, I just looked at the die just to see exactly what the die cut looked like, to know exactly what detail to paint in there. Don't have to clean my brush off between the different colors simply because, I'm not using different colors. I'm only using the one color here. Once I have this all painted, I'll set that aside to dry. Once I'm done painting the leaves, I just tuck that aside to dry while I'm working on other elements. I really love how those flowers are turning out though. So for the second technique, I'm just using a Versamark pad. I have a piece of cardstock here. This is going to be my mat around my white center part of the card. And what I'm doing with this Versamark pad is I'm just pressing it along the outside edge. I'm not going to see anything in the center, so there's no point in doing this technique on the center. And then I'm using a fluffy brush and I'm dusting those Perfect Pearl colors onto that Versamark ink. I'm holding it in the center just so my cardstock doesn't move around, and I'm only using the pink, the purple, and the pewter. I kind of thought the green would look a little odd in there. Once I've got that on all of that Versamark ink, I'm using a Swiffer duster just to remove any of the excess powder. Now, Perfect Pearls are a mica powder that are activated by water, and I didn't need to do anything different with it when I was watercoloring because I was already using that water. But because that Versamark technique didn't have water with it, I needed to mist it with my distress sprayer afterwards to activate that binding agent, and then I set that aside to dry. The glimmer plate, the Anemone glimmer plate had a friend die cut, a friend sentiment on there. So I'm going to use that for the front of the card. I wanted something nice and simple. I didn't want anything that was going to take focus away from those beautiful flowers. So I'm going to cut the sentiment in black, and then I'm going to cut the shadow in green. And here is the third way that I'm using the perfect pearls. I have a little mini mister here with some water, and I'm taking some of those Pewter perfect pearls and I'm mixing it with the water to create a shimmer spray. Now this is perfect if you've got a really small project or a small element you want to add some shimmer spray to. I wouldn't do this for a large project simply because if you happen to run out, it's very hard to make a second batch with exactly the same amount of the perfect pearls to water. So this is the best technique for small batches. But I sprayed that on top of the Friend script, and it gives it a really pretty sheen, just a little bit of a pretty pewter sheen. It doesn't color it, it doesn't cover the black up because there was a lot of water in there. It's still fairly transparent, but it just gives it a little bit of extra shine, and it ties in nicely with the center of those flowers. Once that is all dry, I put the glue on the background, and I'm using Barely Art glue to glue everything together. It's a nice liquid glue. I've got it in a bottle that has a really fine tip to it, so it's perfect for this sentiment. And that glue starts to grab really quite quickly. I do put an acrylic block on there while it's drying, just so that it holds everything flat and frees up my hand to do other layers on different parts of the card. Once I have that black mat glued down, I put the white one in the center of it, and you can see I have just a tiny little bit of that perfect pearl showing through, just enough to tie in with the flowers. I put my flower in the center of that card, and then I'm going to glue on my sentiment using that liquid glue for all of the different elements, and then putting that acrylic block in on top of it to hold everything down in between gluing other elements there. Once everything is dry, here is the finished product. I absolutely love the combination of those perfect pearls watercolored on that black and the detail that that masking magic helped to give those perfect pearl flowers. I hope you enjoyed these techniques, and I hope it inspired you to try out some perfect pearls as a nice way to give a little bit of metallic shimmer to your projects. I really appreciate the time you spend watching my videos with me, and I hope you have a fantastic day.